George Bush, chairman of the Republican Party, loyal supporter of President Nixon, politician with no fears of Watergate reprisals against the GOP, realist who declined to run for governor of Texas in '74. Tonight on Washington Straight Talk, George Bush, a Republican spokesman in a difficult time for Republicans, answers questions from Jim Lehrer, correspondent with the National Public Affairs Center for Television.
Has the president's Operation Candor on Watergate been a flop so far?
No, it's been mixed so far. The visits with the Republican Coordinating Committee, with the Republican governors, with the Republican members of Congress and some Democrats was far more successful, in my judgment, than one would get from the coverage it received. On the other hand, I would have to say that it was set back somewhat by the revelation a few weeks or so ago, more than that now, of some other tape problem. But on balance, I'd say it's been a plus. And on balance, I believe if the president follows through with the papers coming out, more papers now explaining in detail the problems, or the giving answers to those things that have been posed as problems, I believe Operation Candor, I don't like these gimmicky names to it, but I think it can be highly successful.
Yeah.
I know, and I still don't like it.
Okay. Well, what about, you? In other words, you agree with Senator Scott, who says that it's all well and good to say, I'm now going to tell all, but until the president actually does lay it all out, that there's still going to be problems?
Absolutely, and I voted for the resolution of the Republican Coordinating Committee, which encouraged disclosure. I've spoken out against Watergate from the very minute I became chairman of the Republican National Committee. But having said that, I have a feeling that the American people want to support the president. I have a feeling they want to believe. I have a feeling there's this craving for normalcy and stability, and I further have a feeling that on balance, the pluses of the record, this president's record, far outweigh the minuses.
Well, one more question on Operation Candor. Isn't the fact that there had to be an Operation Candor an admission in a way that the people had not been believing him up to now, and he's saying, now, believe me, I'm now going to tell all?
No question that any cursory look at the polls would indicate that there's a credibility problem. And so I think anything that the president can do to lay that to rest through disclosure, as he's attempting to do through these various papers, through the appearances around the country, is a great big plus, not just for this president, but for the country as a whole.
Is that a remarkable development that a man like Richard Nixon cannot go on television and say, believe me, because I'm the President of the United States, that is no longer sufficient, that he must now defend himself or explain himself much like anybody else?
Well, yeah, I think we don't want to overstate it, but yes, it's an interesting and in a way disturbing development. But presidents at low ebb on popularity polls, and you go back to Truman's really low ebb, weren't believed either, you might say, and for different reasons. I mean, we're talking about the political reasons, you know. But I think it's too bad, and I have been one who has encouraged the disclosure route because I happen to believe in the president, and I happen to believe in the accomplishments of the president. And I want others to share my conviction, and yet I will readily concede that they don't. I'm not stupid. Well, that's stupid. I mean, I can read these polls, and I can see that there's a problem. So I want to see it cleared up. I think it will be. With the Congress going home, I think they're going to find more support building for the president, provided this disclosure continues.
Well, let's take
and we have no more shocks.
Okay, well, speaking of shocks, are you confident in your own mind right now as you're sitting here that there are no more shocks?
Well, I don't know.
No more shoes to fall?
I don't know. I've made the point, and it's escaped. Most Republicans understand it. All the precinct types understand it. All those who do something other than wring their hands on the sidelines, those who involve themselves in party, Democrat or Republican, those who get involved instead of just griping on the sidelines, they understand this point. And that is that the party was not involved in Watergate. This party's clean. I'm going to insist that it be clean. We're going to try to provide leadership for our party and for our country in terms of meaningful reform, in terms of the cleanliness of the political process. And I believe that I know Republicans understand this point. But having said that, I think we've got I'm not sure that the American people understand. I think they link, to a degree, Republican to Watergate, and this troubles me.
Well, you can't have it both ways, can you, Mr. Bush? In other words, if you want to cite the accomplishments of a Republican president and say this is indicative of a strong Republican, you have to also take the bad?
Yeah, you have to, but I don't want to because it's not factually correct. The Republican National Committee that I had, I happened to be at the UN orbiting around international affairs at the time and was not involved in that campaign. But everybody astute, that's why I say politicians in both parties understand it. Everyone astute in politics understands that the Republican National Committee was not involved in any of the problems, and thus the official party, involved in the Watergate problems. And it was bypassed. And, of course, one of the great challenges to me is to build a party so strong and lean and effective that it won't be bypassed in the future. But, yeah, people won't let me off the hook that easy. They're not going to say you can take credit for ending the war and ending the draft and hopefully being a catalyst for peace in the Middle East and having peacetime employment at an all-time great record and cite all these marvelous accomplishments, which are marvelous, and you're going to have to accept some of the blame for the other. Well, I say, no, me no Alamo. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, but how can you as head of the Republican Party, build a lean, strong Republican Party as long as this cloud hangs? I mean, being a realist now.
Well, what cloud?
Well, the cloud of Watergate, the cloud of...
okay. I just want to be sure.
The credibility problem of the
yeah,
president?
That, of course, I think that's a realistic impediment to the kind of growth I want to see. And thus, our answer to that, my answer deeply, is disclosure, moving around by the president, reinstallation of pride and credibility, and I happen to believe it can be done. I know there are others who disagree with me, but I believe it can be done because I have believed the president. I didn't answer your question about, I didn't mean to. I just got off another thing about...
bombshells?
Yeah, are there more shocks or bombshells? I simply don't know the answer to that. I don't expect that, but I don't know because I wasn't involved in this thing, and I don't know where it all stands. But I would hope not. I think it would be very, very difficult for Republicans and Democrats alike to take.
But after all, you're out on the front line. You're on the point. You're on programs like this. You're in meetings in California. You're everywhere talking to Republican leaders and the public generally. Don't you have the right to go to expect? Don't you have the right to go to somebody and say, "Hey, now look, fellas, I got to know. Is there anything else coming up?" Or
I not only do I have the right, but I do it, and therefore I have a certain confidence. But I must confess that I didn't anticipate a series of these so-called bombshells. But nevertheless, I still maintain that we got to keep our perspective as a country. And I believe that the positive aspects of this administration, a few of which I've cited, are far more important in terms of the life and death, in terms of the stability of our country, in terms of our leadership in the free world, than Watergate. Who listened to Larry O'Brien's telephone is where it all started and why. Much more important is ending this war, and much more important is the president that understands the power center so he can bring peace to a troubled world, and the revenue sharing so we give the cities that across this country the chance to solve their problems with innovative new answers. And I happen to believe these things will overshadow in history the ugliness that I concede surrounds Watergate.
One more personal question. Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night remembering what happened to Clark McGregor, the man who told the Watergate Committee that he felt he'd been used and that he was actually a part of a cover-up and didn't know it? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with that nightmare yourself about George Bush?
No, because I don't think I've positioned, well, I don't, I'm not going to judge what happened to my friend McGregor,
sure.
But I don't feel anybody using me because I'm not positioned in defense of Watergate. I'm not positioned in defense of handling of tapes for this party. I'm maintaining, and I think correctly, though some are skeptical about my answer, that the party is separate and clean and is going to stay that way. And nobody, no matter what comes out in Watergate, is going to be able to take away from the positive achievements of the Nixon administration and the positive programs of the party. You see, I feel that the Republican Party is much closer on the big issues to the center of America, to the heartbeat of America, than the Democratic Party. We've overlooked the demise and the divisions in the Democratic Party. Great thing that happened to my dear friend Strauss is that
Bob Strauss, head of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, head of the Democratic Party, is that Watergate's permitted him to kind of put tourniquets on his problems when nobody's looking. They're not interested. They want to know who did last leak on the tapes or something went wrong, you see. And so I think that when you get down to it, and the voters incidentally sorted it out pretty well all year long, our party is in good shape on the issues. And the Democratic Party has been divided. I think it's still divided. And I think this is our big hope for the elections coming up in '74.
All right, what's your prediction for '74?
Well, I would start off by a disclaimer, and that is that the party in power normally loses seats. We're the party in power. So I would have a difficult job, whether it's, or we Republicans would, whether we were in normal times. And admittedly, we're not in normal times. But I believe we're going to confound our critics and the pundits, because I happen to feel that we're going to have the kind of candidate that it's going to take to win, and I happen to feel that to the degree the major national issues affect a widely diverse number of elections, 435 congressional elections, 30-some Senate races, 30-some governor's races, that to the degree there's a centralized effect, and it's less in a non-presidential year, we'll be in good shape on the issues.
Yeah, but are the issues other than...
So I think we can, hold our own, pick up seats, as opposed to getting the predictions. The big labor cry now is a veto-proof Congress. What that means is move the country to the left, a position that was repudiated in November of '72. And I don't think that's what the American people want. So I think if we get it in that kind of a focus, do you want reckless spending? If that's what a veto-proof Congress means, I think people are going to rally behind Republican candidates. And elections, Jim, have not historically been won or lost on scandal, particularly when the people involved in the elections aren't involved. And a guy that runs against an honest, clean Republican on Watergate, the Democrat that tries that, is going to get just what Henry Howell got in Virginia when he injected Watergate into that election at the last minute, and he was 10 points ahead on the polls, and he got beat because the voters are fair. They're not going to take out on an innocent, clean candidate something that candidate had nothing to do with.
But the very polls that you cited earlier, Harris and Gallup, have both said now that the people they have talked to are holding the Republican Party responsible for all the problems in Washington.
I don't think it said that. I think what they said is, would you be more or less apt to vote for Republican?
Okay.
So we went back to 1965, a year after the Goldwater election, a year before the '66 elections.
But
and
how is that relevant?
Well, I'll tell you how it's relevant. The support figure for Republican candidates in that, a year before the '66 elections, was almost identical, 32%, to the support figure for Republican candidates now on Harris and Gallup. And that year, the following year, we picked up, 47 seats in the House and 4 in the Senate, 51 net pickup. So I'm saying it's too early to judge. Don't judge 74 elections by some crisis of the moment on Watergate, and don't for a minute assume that people vote on something other than the gut issues. Much more important to the people that vote, in my opinion, than Watergate is the end of the draft, the end of the war, whether they're working. High interest rates, okay, that'd hurt us. Cost of living, that might hurt us. More important people working than ever before, that would help us. But these gut issues, energy, that would be a gut issue. We got to do better on it. We've got to get the country behind this program. But if we're successful in those things, those are the things people vote on. That's my point. And it's happened all year long in 1973, believe me. And so, yes, I can see that people are, right now, with the headlines the way they've been, they're going to be concerned. And that's what they're saying now. That's not what they're going to vote on, and it's not what they've been voting on all year long.
But back to an earlier question, you have no assurance that there aren't going to be more headlines on Election Day, right?
No, and I expect the Democrats, the way they're dragging some of this stuff out, and control of this Congress and some of these hearings and continuation of spending $1 million on the Judiciary Committee to try to examine impeachment of the president, and $1.5 million of the taxpayers' dollars or more on the Watergate Committee, I expect they'll continue to drag it on out. But at some point, the American people are going to say, get off his back. They might say impeach him or get off his back, but they want this matter behind us. And I don't believe the votes are there for impeachment. I don't believe the American people want the president impeached. And that's why I feel confident that at some point we can get it behind us. And then I would readily concede that it might be dragged out for purely political reasons, frankly.
Well, would you say that the president himself has contributed to not dragging this out?
You mean to dragging it?
No, yeah, well, right. I mean, what has he done?
Well, I think it's fair to be critical of some of the White House handling of the Watergate matter. But I also think it's fair to take a look at the president and some of the enormous problems facing a president. And I was at a meeting 10 days or so ago when we talked prior to the release of the White House report on the financial things, and it was discussed there, the need to do this, the need for disclosure and all of that. But I couldn't help but think as I sat there, isn't it too bad this has to happen? I think it does. When we've got these enormous problems that this president is facing at the same time he has this. So I would say that the handling of it has been something less than perfect, and I've been critical of it. But I come back, overriding that, my confidence, you properly said, I support the president. And I do, because I think, on balance, the accomplishments of this president are fantastic. Okay. And so I'm just not going to sit and wring my hands over a matter that I probably am more deeply troubled about, Watergate, than almost anybody you've had on here. I think I'm motivated idealistically in my participation in politics. And I don't like to see the idealism of my children sullied, these boys of mine, and I don't like to have my own challenge. But I'm going to look at things in a relative fashion, and the accomplishments outweigh the agony of the moment of Watergate. To me,
you're also a pragmatist. You're also the head of the Republican Party. You're also loyal to the president. You're the president's man. He selected you for the job to head the Republican Party. All right, if and when the time should come where the interests of the Republican Party no longer coincide with the interests of the president, what do you do?
Well, you'd have to define what interests are, and now we're getting into something that's so hypothetical that I really wouldn't know how to answer it, because maybe I'm wrong, but I'm operating from the old tradition that a man is innocent till proved guilty. I think we've gotten away from that a little bit, because I honestly feel, and again, maybe this isn't fair, that some in the political process and some in the journalistic process who have already said the president must be impeached and thrown out of office or must resign, I think they've made up their minds. And my view is a man's innocent till he's proved guilty. So I'm not going to get into the hypothetical question of you're asking me, well, if he's proved guilty, what posture is the party in? That I'm not geared up to think that way at this point, because I happen to believe, you see, that the president will not be impeached and will not resign.
All right, what about...
I don't know that I'm not sure I've satisfactorily answered your question. Try it again, because I didn't mean to duck it, but that's...
Well, I'm just trying to ask you, I was giving an example, but is it possible for you, or do you see yourself as an independent functionary as the Republican Party is separated from the future of President Richard M. Nixon?
Yeah, party is ongoing. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. And the party will be in existence long after President Nixon's term expires in 1976. And so and the party must gear up after the 74 elections for the election of another president in 76. So there's no question that party is ongoing. But as I sort these priorities out, there is no question in my system of order that the president's head of the party, and he's entitled to support. Now, he's not entitled to support of illegal activities, and I don't think he condones some of the things that went wrong in the campaign, because I've heard him say so, and I know he doesn't, and I darn sure don't condone them. But then to sit there and kind of move from that to condemnation of the president, I'm not about to do that.
All right, let me put it another way. Let's say that based on your soundings, based on your discussions with party leaders throughout the country, people who are running for re-election or running for election in '74, you came to the pragmatic conclusion that the Republican Party would be better off in '74 with a new, fresh Gerald Ford rather than a crippled Richard Nixon in terms of the future of the party, and at least in that given election. Would you do anything about it?
Well, this is so
That's
hypothetical.
Well, but it's
yeah,
a theory.
It's a theory. I suppose if I really came to that conclusion, what I probably do would be get out of my job because of how I conceive the order of party to be when you have an incumbent president. But if I reached that conclusion, I think what I'd do is to resign, and I think I'd speak up. And if I did something that would be critical of Nixon, I'd be one of the most sought-after speakers in this country because these are the guys that can make the headlines. They really are, Jim. And I'm not going to, but having said that, I don't believe this is going to happen. And when Jerry Ford was confirmed and inaugurated a few days ago, sworn in, why, instead of kind of adopting the thesis, oh, this means now the push for resignation and impeachment can go forward, I view it as the opposite. I view it as a restoration of a modicum of the appearance of stability that is going to be very good and very well received. And the very openness and honesty of Ford is going to help the party, it's going to help the country, and it's going to help President Nixon. And I think it's going to work just the opposite from the way some of the others have suggested, that this will now free up the country to give the president some more grief. Because you see, I don't believe the people really want to see this president impeached or resign. I know some do, and I know the figures have gone up and all of that, but I just don't believe it. No, Republicans don't. And you'll notice that there have been very, very few that have spoken out in favor of either course of action. Very few in terms of leadership.
But many have spoken out and saying, come on, let's have it all out. If we don't have it all out, then we're going to have problems. You said that?
Right here.
Hugh Scott,
right
Barry
here.
Goldwater,
Republican
Peter
Coordinating Committee, that's the leadership of the Senate, House, governors. We all feel that way. And very candidly, I have been critical of the way that has not happened. And I've been critical of the shocks.
Can't you go over there and shake somebody and say, hey, look, let's get
they
this thing
understand my
over.
position.
Yeah.
And I do go over there, but I don't want the thrust of this to be, Bush critical of handling. I've said it over and over again. I took up, before I took this job with the president, my concern about Watergate, and this is one of the reasons I have more confidence in him than some of the strongest doubters. I talked to him before I left the United Nations about how strongly I felt against what I knew to be Watergate. Far less of it, I might say, then than I now know to be Watergate.
You knew now
and I talked to him, but let me finish this one thing.
Okay.
And the president said, well, fine, speak out against it. If you're opposed or you feel that way, speak out against this thing. And I've done it from the inception of my chairmanship, but I haven't done it in the context that I hold the president responsible or feel that the president knew all about this or the president participated in a cover. I don't believe it. I accept the man's word on it. And I think most Republicans do.
If you knew then...
And most Americans want to.
Okay. If you knew then what you know now, would you have taken this job?
What are the options? I mean, but sure you would. And you don't just do the things that are fun and easy in life. And the president appointed me. I lost a race for the United States Senate in 1970. And I thought at that point, gosh, this is a real blow.
And you appointed that race, and you were supposed to, you were supposed to win that.
I thought I was going to win it. And the president appointed me to be ambassador at the UN. Fantastic experience. Learned an awful lot and hopefully represented this country with some degree of honor and some degree of strength. And when, again, maybe it's just my concept of civics, but if the President of the United States asks you to do something, take on a job, knowing you're going to do it with your own standards of integrity and that kind of thing, I feel if you can do it well, you probably ought to do it when you're talking about appointive offices. And yes, I think I'd probably do it over again if he asked me to do it right now. I guess I'd have my fingers crossed behind me and saying, gee, I hope he doesn't ask me to do that. But it's not been a fun year. On the other hand, it's important work. And when party system is under attack, and when the political process is under attack, and when Congress shows less than garbage collectors, and I have great affection for our garbage collectors, and I don't like but they had to list that to show, you know, kind of trying to portray somebody to be low in the last poll I saw. And it shows, you know, the Republicans at a low ebb in terms of registration.
What's this doing to you, George? What's it doing to you?
You got to get in and fight. You got to get in and participate. And I get lots of free advice. Guys writing letters telling me, oh, you got to do this and that. And I sometimes get so churned up inside. Well, you know, great with the free advice on your 710 commuter train to Westchester County. When did you last go to a precinct meeting? When did you last fight for your party or your beliefs or something? So it's getting me, you ask what's it do to me, it puts me through an emotional gamut. But I come out on the far end of it is supportive of our system, deep conviction that the Democrats and Republicans alike elected to office are people of integrity, not dishonor, and a compulsion to demonstrate this, and in the process to strengthen my party. And so it's tough, but I just think it's important work I'm about.
You told me once a long time ago that you felt that your number one interest was always going to be elective office, and yet you just recently said, no thanks, I don't think I'll go home to Texas and run for governor. Why not? Why didn't you do it? Watergate?
Well, there were several reasons. It was conveyed, it was a no-win deal, because people, when I turned down going back to Texas to run for governor, people said, he doesn't want to go back because his party's weak and he's afraid he's going to lose a Watergate. And if I had gone back, you know what they'd have said? You know it in your heart what they'd have said. They'd have said, Bush, and hopefully they'd said, a man of some integrity, I don't know at this point, but they'd have said, this guy's leaving, sinking ship syndrome, doesn't believe in the president anymore. And my wife said to me, Jim, I don't want to sound maudlin about it, but she said to me, you don't have a choice. You don't have an option. Good God, you had those 2 fantastic years at the UN, and you've got a challenge where you are. You don't have a choice. And she's right. Because if I had, they'd have just piled on the president. I'd have been, you know, just passing hero of the moment. My conscience had welled up and I left, and even though I didn't use that as a reason, and they'd have piled on the president. And I'm not about to do that. Not about to, you know, participate in that. And so, you know, I'm not saying I would have won down there. The pollster showed me losing. But he also, maybe he just wanted more business. I don't think so. But he had it all figured out how I could win. And so, yet I don't run. Republicans are scared to run. Stay here, leave here, and people say, don't have confidence in the president.
Mr. Bush, thank you very much.
From Washington, NPACT has brought you George Bush, chairman of the Republican National Committee, and Jim Lehrer, NPACT correspondent, on Washington Straight Talk. Next week, Elliot Richardson, who held 3 cabinet posts in the Nixon administration, Attorney General, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and who resigned over the firing of Watergate Special Prosecutor Cox, looks at the recent past and his own political future. Elliot Richardson, with Haynes Johnson, Pulitzer Prize winner and assistant managing editor of the Washington Post. The preceding program was made possible by a grant from the Ford Foundation. Washington Straight Talk is a production of NPACT, a division of the Greater Washington Educational Telecommunications Association.